So you can't defend what you can't scan. GootKit malware bypasses user access control.
So Andy, I guess we're going to continue with the malware theme today with your story, right?
Yeah, we are. We're going to be talking about GootKit a little bit. G-O-O-T kit. I don't know if it's kind of hard to say. But for those who don't know, GootKit is a banking Trojan whose goal is to steal your banking credentials. And it does that by recording your screen or by redirecting you to fake banking login pages. That's how it works. So a security researcher by the name of Vitaly Kremez, I hope I'm saying that right, he found that GootKit actually attacks Windows Defender by adding the directory that the malware lives in to the, what is it called? It avoids detection by adding it to the scan exclusion list. Mm-hmm. So it basically tells Windows Defender, don't scan this directory that my malware is in. And the key to doing that is through the use of the good old fodhelper.exe. Mm-hmm. So for those who don't know, fodhelper.exe is a Windows 10 management tool. It was found to allow UAC, or user access control bypass, in 2017 by a researcher by the name of Christian B, is all that's known about him. So essentially what happens is when an application wants to perform a task that requires administrative purposes, it brings up a little prompt on your screen and it asks you for that permission. It says, hey, I want to do something as an admin. And you give it, you say yes or you say no. Bypassing that means that you can run things in the background as admin without the user knowing. So that's kind of a big problem. So what Christian B found was that fodhelper.exe actually runs with the auto elevate attribute set to true, which means it can run itself with a higher privilege on its own when it deems it's necessary, which means it can do things without bringing up that little control prompt letting the user know that something's happening in the background, basically. So what Christian B was able to figure out was that the fodhelper.exe works by first checking for a few registry keys that, strangely enough, don't actually exist by default in Windows 10.
That's actually kind of normal.
Is it really?
Yes, that's how they do a lot of GPO policies later. They introduce certain registry keys, and if you have them, then whatever, you can apply that setting. Yeah.
Okay, so it checks for some registry keys that just don't exist by default in Windows 10. And then if it finds those, then it does other things. So what Christian B was able to figure out is if you just create the keys that it's looking for, one of the keys actually lets you dictate and enter in further instructions on what to do when it's running. So essentially what you can do is you can not inject, but you can kind of say, hey, open this application, and then it'll run with the higher privileges because that's fodhelper.exe runs as as
a helper. Well, what else would it do?
It's helping you. Exactly.
Help you get root privilege.
Exactly. So now that we know what fodhelper.exe does, exactly how it works, if we talk about GootKit a little bit more. So the first thing GootKit does is it checks to see that Windows Defender is actually enabled on the machine. And then if it is, it'll create those registry keys. And then with WMIC, it'll actually go in and it'll add the directory that the malware is going to be sitting in or is sitting in to that exclusion list so that it actually doesn't scan the file itself. And then it goes in and it deletes the initial registry key for some cleanup, and then it actually was able to figure out if the bypass was successful.
A lot of malware really needs to take those types of actions these days on an endpoint. I mean, doing penetration testing, I can tell you that Defender does tend to shut things down a lot better than it used to. That particular defense mechanism has really come a long way in the last several years. So trying to avoid antivirus or Defender, these are things that every attacker is got those techniques in their playbook, and their malware has to be able to do that as well. So certainly not surprising that it's trying to do that and find a way to sort of sidestep that control. It is interesting the method that they've used to do that, though.
And I'm surprised I'm not totally surprised that a method exists to kind of bypass the UAC control. But I remember it being the mechanism that was supposed to help prevent some of these escalation items. You know, you can become root when you need to, when you click yes, and Windows kind of enforces that. So seeing a process being able to do that without the dialogue is a little bit of a surprise to me. It's definitely something I want to look into more. Thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah. But it's worth noting that in order for this to work, the user has to be admin on the machine
to start with.
So, you know, a lot of folks are admin on their machine, you know, whether they know it or not. So that's something. And then you can always, I think there's a setting that you can say always prompt or something to enforce that even still. So
it just points back to the general best practice that really, if you want to really mitigate a lot of risk, you really need to operate that principle of least privilege across all users in your environment.
You want to make sure that you're on the lookout for your system acting abnormally. If you're using a product like Windows Defender or some other AV product, make sure that it's enabled, it's not reporting any issues, it's not showing like a little warning icon, that it's up to date. And periodically do review your configuration for the software to make sure that the things that are kind of like in the whitelist or things that don't get scanned are the items that you expect.